A tiny kitten keeps following a giant dog for help. But this isn't just a cute moment, it's the start of something dangerous. Out in the middle of nowhere, the dog's owner can't understand why the little creature won't give up. Then, the dog suddenly changes course. And what they find will leave her shaking. There's more at stake here than anyone could imagine. Lives hanging by a thread, and a truth so unexpected it will break her heart. Why did this fragile kitten choose this dog? And what's waiting for them at the end of the trail that will change everything? Your comments and presence here remind me why I tell these stories. If you still believe in the healing strength of love, truth, and quiet courage, then you're the reason this channel exists. Clara Whitfield couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. In her 25 years of search and rescue work, she'd learned to trust her instincts, and right now, they were screaming at her. She watched as the tiny kitten darted between the towering pines, its matted fur catching the late afternoon sunlight that filtered through the branches. "This isn't normal behavior," she muttered, more to herself than to Ranger. Her aging German shepherd whined softly in response, his ears perked forward as he tracked the kitten's movements. The trail they usually walked was well worn and familiar, but today it felt different, charged with an urgency she couldn't explain. The kitten stopped about 30 feet ahead, turning to fix them with intense green eyes. Its tiny body trembled, but there was nothing uncertain about its actions. Clara noticed how it would take a few steps forward, then look back at them with an almost human-like intelligence. "What do you make of this, old friend?" she asked Ranger, who stood alert beside her. His graying muzzle twitched as he scented the air, and Clara recognized the change in his posture, the same one he'd shown countless times during their rescue operations. He was on alert, reading the situation just as she was. Clara's weathered hands absently touched the scratch marks she'd noticed on the kitten's side. They weren't from brambles or branches. They looked more like the kind made when an animal was trying to escape something. The memory of countless rescue operations flashed through her mind. How often had she seen similar signs of desperation? The kitten mewed again, more insistently this time. It was no longer the plaintive cry of a lost animal, but something more urgent. Clara had spent too many years reading situations and animal behavior to ignore what was right in front of her. This wasn't a stray looking for food or attention. This little creature was trying to tell them something. "All right," she said firmly, squaring her shoulders. "Show us what's wrong." As if understanding her words, the kitten immediately turned and started moving with purpose, no longer glancing back quite so often, as if confident now that they would follow. Clara lengthened her stride, keeping pace while Ranger moved steadily beside her, his powerful body alert despite his age. The forest grew denser as they moved away from their usual path. Pine needles cushioned their footsteps, and the air grew cooler in the deeper shade. Clara's mind automatically catalogued their route, marking landmarks and noting the direction, old habits that had saved lives more times than she could count. "Easy, Ranger," she murmured as her companion's pace quickened. The German shepherd's behavior was another clear signal. He sensed something, too. His training was showing through, despite the years since their last official rescue. "Something's never really left you," Clara thought, feeling her own senses sharpen as they pushed deeper into the woods. The kitten moved with surprising speed for such a small creature, its determination evident in every step. Whatever was driving it seemed to give it strength beyond its tiny frame. Clara noticed how it favored certain paths, avoiding thick underbrush, as if it had made this journey before. She touched the radio clipped to her belt, another habit she'd never abandoned. Even in retirement, she kept basic emergency gear with her on walks. Right now, she was grateful for that preparedness, though she hoped she wouldn't need it. The light was starting to take on the golden quality of late afternoon when the kitten suddenly stopped. It turned to face them, its small body rigid with tension. Clara felt her breath catch as she saw the change in its demeanor. Gone was the urgent movement. Now it stood still, its eyes fixed on them with an almost pleading expression. Ranger moved forward slowly, his nose working the air. Clara watched as her longtime partner's body language changed, the subtle shift that had always told her they'd found what they were looking for. But this time, she wasn't sure what that something was. The kitten let out a different kind of cry now, softer, more cautious. It padded a few steps forward, then looked back at Clara with such intensity that she felt a chill run down her spine despite the warm afternoon. "Okay, little one," she said softly, her voice carrying the calm authority that had steadied so many rescue operations. "We're here. We're listening." The sunlight dappled through the trees, casting shifting shadows on the forest floor as Clara and Ranger stood ready, waiting for whatever the kitten was trying to show them. Years of experience told her they were about to find something significant. She just hoped they weren't too late to help. The narrow trail wound deeper into the Montana wilderness, forcing Clara to watch her footing on the increasingly uneven ground. Pine needles gave way to loose rocks that shifted under her boots, while thick branches reached across the path like grasping fingers. The determined kitten stayed just far enough ahead to keep them moving, but close enough that they wouldn't lose sight of its small form in the deepening shadows. Ranger pressed closer to Clara's side, his powerful shoulder occasionally brushing against her leg. She recognized his protective stance, the same one he'd taken countless times during their search and rescue days when he sensed potential danger. His ears remained alert, swiveling to catch every sound from the forest around them. "Getting chilly," Clara muttered, zipping up her jacket. The temperature had dropped noticeably as they descended into what she now recognized as one of the deeper ravines cutting through these mountains. The afternoon sun barely reached here, blocked by towering pines and thick undergrowth. Their breath began to form small clouds in the air. The sound of rushing water grew louder with each step. Clara knew the river that ran through these parts, swift and treacherous, especially this time of year when the mountain snowmelt fed its current. The trail narrowed further, hugging a rocky outcropping that dropped steeply to the churning water below. That's when she heard it, a faint but distinct tapping sound carrying through the trees, metal against stone, rhythmic and desperate. Clara's pulse quickened as her trained ears focused on the noise. Each tap seemed to say, "Hurry, hurry, hurry! You hear that, boy?" She whispered to Ranger. His low whine confirmed he did. The kitten, too, seemed to respond to the sound, its pace quickening as it led them around a sharp bend in the trail. Clara stopped dead in her tracks, her hand automatically reaching for Ranger's collar. 20 feet below them, a red pickup truck hung precariously on the steep slope. Its front end dangled over the rushing river, held back only by a massive pine tree that leaned at an awkward angle. The truck's position was so unstable that even the slight breeze made it shudder against its tenuous anchor. "Oh my God," Clara breathed, her search and rescue instincts kicking into high gear. Through the truck's cracked windshield, she could make out a figure slumped over the steering wheel. The tapping sound grew clearer now. It was coming from inside the cabin, where the driver's hand weakly knocked a wrench against the window frame in a desperate call for help. The kitten mewed urgently, drawing Clara's attention to something else. Through the truck's side window, she spotted a cardboard box wedged against the passenger door. Inside, several tiny forms huddled together. More kittens, the same size as their brave sibling who had sought help. The box had partially collapsed in the crash, but somehow the kittens inside had survived. Clara's mind raced through her rescue training. The slope was steep but manageable with the right approach. The bigger challenge would be stabilizing the truck. One wrong move could send it plummeting into the river below. She needed to act fast, but she also needed to be smart about this. "Ranger, stay," she commanded firmly, knowing her partner would hold position until told otherwise. She unclipped the radio from her belt, the same emergency radio she'd carried on hundreds of missions before retirement. Her fingers moved automatically, muscle memory taking over as she called in the emergency. "This is Clara Whitfield, former search and rescue. I have a vehicle accident with a trapped victim on the North Ridge Trail, approximately 2 miles east of Broken Pine Road. Driver is conscious but appears injured. Vehicle is unstable on a slope above River Canyon, requesting immediate assistance." The response was immediate, crackling through the speaker. "Copy that, Clara. Emergency services are being dispatched. Estimated arrival 15 minutes. Clara's eyes never left the truck as she assessed the situation. The driver's tapping had grown weaker, and she could see his head lolling to one side. 15 minutes might be too long to wait. The brave little kitten that had led them here paced anxiously at the edge of the slope, its eyes fixed on the box containing its siblings. "Understood," she replied into the radio. "But I'm going to have to start rescue procedures before you arrive. This situation is critical." She could see the truck shift slightly with each gust of wind. Time was running out. Ranger whined softly beside her, and Clara placed a reassuring hand on his head. "I know, old friend. We're not done saving lives just yet." She began pulling equipment from her pack, the basic rescue gear she still carried out of habit. It wasn't much, but it would have to do until help arrived. The kitten watched her intently, as if understanding that the rescue it had sought was finally about to begin. Its tiny body trembled with exhaustion, but its green eyes remained fixed on Clara with unwavering trust. Clara's trained eyes scanned the treacherous slope, taking in every detail. Years of search and rescue experience had taught her to read terrain like a book, and what she saw now made her stomach clench. The ground was a dangerous mix of loose soil and scattered rocks, with patches of wet earth that could give way under any weight. The truck's precarious position looked even more alarming from this angle. Its rear wheels barely gripped the slope, while the front end hung over the churning river like a massive pendulum. She cupped her hands around her mouth. "Can you hear me?" She called down, keeping her voice steady and clear despite her racing heart. "I'm Clara Whitfield, and I'm here to help. Emergency services are on their way." The man's head turned slightly at her voice. His lips moved, forming words she couldn't make out over the rush of the river. His hand, still clutching the wrench, made one more weak tap against the window before falling limply into his lap. Through the cracked windshield, Clara could see his eyes struggling to stay open. 30 minutes, she muttered to herself, checking her watch. The emergency response team would need at least that long to reach this remote location with their heavy rescue equipment. Her gaze drifted to the cardboard box where the kittens huddled together, then to their brave siblings standing beside her. The small creature had shown remarkable intelligence, seeking not help for itself, but for its trapped family and the injured man. Ranger's anxious whine pulled her attention back to the immediate situation. Her old partner paced back and forth along the edge of the slope, his ears pinned back and his tail low. Clear signs he sensed the danger of their situation. Clara had seen that body language countless times during their working years together, usually right before a situation turned critical. "I know, boy," she said softly, reaching out to steady him. "We can't wait." The dormant instincts that had guided her through hundreds of rescues began to stir, like old muscles remembering their strength. Clara felt her mind shift into the familiar pattern of rapid assessment and planning. She needed to reach the truck without causing any vibrations that might dislodge it. The slope was steep, but not impossible, if she chose her path carefully. She knelt down, running her hands over the ground near the edge. The soil here was more stable, anchored by tree roots. To her left, a series of larger rocks jutted out from the slope, creating potential footholds. Between them, she spotted patches of harder ground where water runoff had packed the earth tight. "That's the way down," she murmured, mapping the route in her mind. But even the best path would be dangerous if she sent any debris tumbling toward the truck. One wrong step, one dislodged rock, and the whole vehicle might tip forward into the river. Clara shrugged off her backpack and pulled out her emergency rope. Not nearly long enough for a proper rescue line, but it would help. She tied one end securely around a thick tree trunk, testing the knot with several sharp tugs. The other end she fashioned into a basic safety harness around her waist. "Ranger, stay!" she commanded firmly, pointing to a spot near the anchor tree. The German shepherd immediately sat, his posture alert and ready. Even in his older years, his training held firm. He would stay there until she called him, no matter what happened. The kitten, however, had other ideas. It crept to the edge of the slope, clearly intending to follow her down. "Oh no, little one," Clara said, gently scooping it up and placing it next to Ranger. "You've done your part. Let me do mine now." To her surprise, the kitten stayed put, pressing against Ranger's warm fur as if drawing comfort from the larger animal. Clara took one last look at the scene below her. The truck shuddered slightly in a gust of wind, and she saw the driver's head slump further forward. In the cardboard box, one of the kittens let out a tiny mew that somehow carried over the sound of the river. The sound steeled her resolve. Time seemed to slow as her rescue training took over completely. Every movement now would need to be deliberate, every step carefully chosen. She couldn't afford to rush, but she also couldn't waste a single second. The man's weakening condition and the truck's unstable position created a deadline as real as any ticking clock. Clara took a deep breath, tightened the rope around her waist, and began to pick her way down the slope. Each footstep was a calculated risk, each handhold tested before she put her full weight on it. Small rocks occasionally came loose under her boots, but she managed to guide them away from the truck's path. The brave little kitten that had led them here watched intently from above, its green eyes never leaving Clara as she made her careful descent. Its mission to find help was nearly complete, but the most dangerous part of the rescue was just beginning. Clara's fingers brushed against the familiar worn leather of Ranger's old search and rescue harness at the bottom of her pack. She'd kept it there out of habit all these years, unable to leave it behind even after retirement. The sturdy straps and metal clips felt like old friends in her hands, still strong despite their age, much like Ranger himself. She worked quickly but methodically, securing additional anchor points between herself and a thick-trunked pine tree. The rope system wasn't elegant, but it would give her the stability she needed. Above her, Ranger watched attentively, his ears pricked forward as Clara tested each knot with firm tugs. The slope beneath her boots was treacherous, slick with patches of melting snow that had turned the soil into a dangerous mix of mud and loose gravel. Each step required careful consideration. Clara dug the heels of her boots into the earth, creating small platforms before shifting her weight forward. The truck loomed closer with each cautious movement, its metal frame groaning softly in the wind. "I'm almost there," she called out to the man inside, keeping her voice steady and reassuring. "Just hold on a little longer." When she finally reached the passenger side of the truck, she could see the full extent of the damage. The vehicle sat at an awkward angle, its frame twisted from the impact. The passenger door had been dented, but not completely crushed, giving her a chance to work with it. Clara braced herself against the truck's body, careful not to shift its precarious balance. She wrapped her fingers around the door handle and pulled. The metal protested with a harsh screech, but the door moved just enough to create a gap. Inside, the cardboard box of kittens sat wedged against the dashboard, their tiny faces peering out at her with wide, frightened eyes. "Easy now," she murmured, reaching carefully through the opening. The box was damp, but still intact, and she could feel the warmth of the small bodies inside. With gentle movements, she extracted the container, holding it close to her chest. The kittens mewed softly, huddling together for warmth. The man stirred as she secured the box to her harness. His face was pale, lined with pain, but his eyes were clearer now. "Evan," he managed to say, his voice rough. "Evan Callahan, thank you. For the kittens." "Clara Whitfield," she replied, studying his position in the driver's seat. "I'm going to get you out too, Evan. Can you tell me where you're hurt?" Evan's face tightened with pain as he tried to shift. "Legs, trapped under the dash. Everything crashed forward in the impact." He lifted his hand weakly, gesturing toward his pinned lower body. Don't think I can move them." Clara's experienced eyes took in the situation. The front of the truck had crumpled inward, pushing the dashboard down onto Evan's legs. The steering column had been forced downward, further complicating any attempt at extraction. This wasn't going to be a simple rescue. I understand, she said calmly, even as her mind raced through possible solutions. I'm going to get these little ones to safety first, then come back for you. Don't try to move. Let me handle everything. Just then, a sharp crack split the air. The tree that had stopped the truck's initial fall shuddered, its roots straining against the vehicle's weight. Small stones and clumps of earth tumbled past Clara's feet, disappearing into the churning river below. The truck shifted slightly, metal groaning against wood. Clara's heart jumped into her throat, but her voice remained steady. That tree's not going to hold forever, but I promise you, I'm coming back. You're not alone in this. Evan's eyes met hers, fear mixing with resigned understanding. The kittens, he said softly. Get them safe first, please. Clara nodded, already plotting her careful ascent. The box of kittens was awkward against her chest, forcing her to adjust her balance with each step. She moved with deliberate precision, testing each foothold before committing her weight. The sound of the straining tree behind her urged speed, but she fought the impulse to rush. One wrong step now could send her tumbling down the slope, endangering not only herself but the precious cargo she carried. When she finally reached the top, she found Ranger still at his post, the brave little kitten pressed against his side. Clara quickly set the box down, opening it to check on its occupants. 4 tiny faces looked up at her, scared but unharmed. Their rescuer sibling immediately bounded over, touching noses with each of them through the cardboard walls. But there was no time to celebrate this small victory. Another ominous creak echoed from below, and Clara knew her next task would be far more challenging. Freeing Evan would require all her skill and strength, and time was running out. She turned back toward the slope, her mind already working through the equipment she had and what she would need to do. The tree's groaning presence was a constant reminder that this rescue had suddenly become a race against time. Clara's stomach clenched as another gust of wind rocked the truck, making the metal frame groan in protest. The front bumper dipped a few inches lower, and she heard the sharp crack of smaller branches giving way beneath the vehicle's weight. Time was slipping away faster than she'd feared. "Hold on, Evan," she called, fighting to keep her voice steady. She needed to free him from the seatbelt first. It was the quickest way to ensure she could pull him out once she figured out how to release his legs. But as she reached for her belt where her rescue knife should have been, her fingers met empty air. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her knife was sitting in its leather sheath on her kitchen counter, where she'd left it after cleaning it the night before. Clara's heart thundered in her chest as her eyes darted around the cab, searching for anything sharp enough to cut through the thick polyester webbing. The windshield had spiderwebbed, but hadn't shattered, leaving no useful glass edges. The dashboard was a mess of crumpled plastic and metal, but nothing within reach looked promising. There's a box cutter," Evan mumbled, his words slurring slightly. His face had grown paler, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold. "In the glove compartment. Was using it to open the box for the kittens." Clara stretched across the passenger seat, careful not to shift her weight too suddenly. The glove compartment was jammed, warped from the impact. She had to brace herself against the seat and pull with both hands before it finally popped open with a metallic shriek. The box cutter tumbled out along with a scatter of papers and old receipts. As she retrieved the tool, Evan's voice drifted up again, weak but urgent. "The brakes, they just went, couldn't stop." He swallowed hard, his eyes focusing and unfocusing. "Found the kittens. Behind my shop. Abandoned. Was taking them to the shelter in town." His words faded into a pained grunt as the truck shifted again. Clara leaned closer, both to hear him better and to begin working on the seatbelt. "You were trying to save them," she said softly, understanding blooming in her chest. The parallel struck her then. How the little kitten had risked everything to lead her here, just as Evan had put himself in danger to protect the helpless animals. "My wife," Evan continued, his voice catching. "She always brought strays home. Couldn't leave them. couldn't let them down. His eyes closed briefly, then opened with visible effort. Saw the curve coming, knew the brakes were gone, could have jumped out maybe, but the kittens... You stayed with them. Clara finished, her throat tight with emotion. Just like that brave little one up there stayed with you. Wouldn't leave until it found help. She worked carefully with the box cutter, sawing through the tough fabric of the seatbelt. The blade was dull, making the task harder than it should have been. The wind picked up again, whistling through the broken driver's side window. The entire truck creaked ominously, and Clara could hear the sounds of roots tearing free from the soil. The tree that had caught them was losing its grip on the hillside. Almost there, she assured Evan, though her hands were shaking now. The box cutter's blade finally broke through the last threads of the seatbelt, and the restraint fell away from Evan's chest. He sagged forward slightly but caught himself with a grimace. Clara took a moment to study his trapped legs. The dashboard had collapsed inward, pinning him from the knees down. The steering column had been forced down and to the side, further complicating the situation. She would need leverage to free him, something to pry up the crushed metal enough for him to slip free. But what struck her most wasn't the technical challenge of the rescue. It was the chain of selfless acts that had led to this moment. Evan, refusing to abandon the kittens even when his own life was in danger. The tiny kitten, making its way through the woods to find help for the others. And now here she was, drawn back into a life she thought she'd left behind, because some things were more important than staying safe and comfortable. The truck groaned again, and Clara felt the vehicle shift beneath her feet. They were out of time for reflection. She needed to find a way to free Evan's legs, and she needed to do it now. The river churned below them, a constant reminder of what waited if they failed. "I'm going to get you out of here," she promised, her mind already racing through possibilities. "We just need to figure out how to move this dashboard enough for you to slide free." Clara's training kicked in, years of experience crystallizing into rapid-fire thoughts. The truck's precarious position meant every second counted, but rushing could send them all into the river below. She needed to work smart, not just fast. "Ranger's lead," she muttered, her eyes darting to where the sturdy leather leash hung from her shoulder. It wasn't just a walking accessory. The lead was professional-grade rescue equipment she'd never stopped carrying, built to support serious weight. Clara quickly untangled it, measuring the length with practiced hands. "I'm going to secure this door," she explained to Evan, whose head had started to droop forward. "Hey, stay with me, okay?" Her sharp tone made him blink and straighten slightly. "That's it. Keep talking. Tell me more about those kittens you found." While Evan spoke in halting sentences about discovering the tiny animals behind his shop, Clara worked the lead through the passenger door's frame. She wedged it tight against the door's hinges, creating an anchor point that would help prevent the truck from rolling further. The leather creaked as she pulled it taut, testing the hold. "Good girl," she whispered to the lead, patting it like she would Ranger's head. The familiarity of the motion steadied her hands. Above them, she could hear her faithful shepherd's occasional whines, monitoring their progress. The wind gusted again, and Clara grabbed the doorframe as the truck shuddered. The lead held firm, but the movement sent loose pebbles skittering past her boots into the churning water below. The sound of the river seemed to have grown louder, hungrier. "Evan," she said, forcing calm into her voice, "I need something to cut through the metal around your legs. Do you have any tools in here?" He squinted, clearly fighting to focus. Toolbox, backseat." His words slurred together, but he managed to gesture weakly behind him. "Under my jacket." Clara carefully shifted her weight, reaching into the back seat. An old denim jacket lay crumpled across the bench, and beneath it she could just make out the corner of a red metal box. The angle was awkward. She had to brace one knee on the center console and stretch until her muscles burned. Her fingers brushed the toolbox's handle, but it was wedged tight. She bit her lip, adjusted her position slightly, and tried again. This time, She managed to hook 2 fingers through the handle and slowly drag it forward. The box was battered, covered in old paint splatters and what looked like years of garage grime. Clara's hands shook slightly as she worked the rusty latch, praying she'd find something useful inside. The lid creaked open to reveal a jumble of worn tools, wrenches, screwdrivers, and various bits of hardware scattered loosely in the bottom. "Come on, come on," she muttered, sifting through the contents. Her heart leaped when her fingers closed around something promising, a small cutting blade, the kind used for detailed metalwork. It wasn't ideal, but in her experience, having the wrong tool was better than having no tool at all. She pulled it out, examining the edge. The blade looked sharp enough to do the job, though it would take time they might not have. The river's roar seemed to fill the entire world now, a constant reminder of what waited below. "Found it," she told Evan, showing him the blade. His eyes focused on it briefly before sliding shut again. Clara reached over and squeezed his shoulder. "Hey, still with me?" He nodded weakly. "Still here, just tired." "I know, but you need to stay awake." Clara positioned herself where she could best access the crushed metal around his legs. "Keep talking. Tell me about your wife, the one who loved strays." As Evan's rough voice spun out memories of a woman who could never pass a hungry animal without helping, Clara tested the cutting blade against the wreckage. The first contact of metal on metal sent a harsh screech through the cab, but the blade bit in. It would work. It had to work. The air felt heavier with each passing moment, thick with tension and the spray from the rapids below. Clara could feel sweat trickling down her back despite the cold. But her hands were steady as she began to cut, guided by decades of experience and the desperate knowledge that this was their one chance to get Evan out alive. She worked methodically, focusing on creating a path that would let him pull his legs free without bringing the whole dashboard down on them. The cutting blade grew hot in her hands, but she didn't pause. Above them, Ranger kept his silent vigil, while the brave little kitten that had led them here huddled with its siblings in their box of safety. Time seemed to stretch and compress strangely as Clara worked, measured now in the rasping sound of the blade and Evan's increasingly drowsy responses. But finally, she felt the last crucial piece of metal give way beneath her hands. Clara's fingers worked the cutting blade with practiced precision, attacking the frayed seatbelt that still held Evan firmly in place. The webbing was tough, designed to withstand incredible force, but the sharp edge slowly ate through the thick fabric. Evan gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, bracing himself for whatever came next. "Almost there," Clara assured him, sawing faster as another gust of wind rocked the truck. "When this gives way, I need you to lean toward me. Don't try to stand, just let me guide you." The seatbelt's fibers started to separate, individual threads snapping one by one. Above them, Ranger's steady presence offered silent support, the rope running from his harness down to Clara remaining taut and true. A sharp crack split the air like a gunshot, making them both freeze. Clara's eyes darted to the tree trunk that had been holding the truck in place. A jagged line had appeared in the wood, stretching across its width like a lightning bolt. "Now," Clara commanded, redoubling her efforts on the seatbelt. "We need to move now." The last few threads of the seatbelt gave way suddenly, and Evan slumped forward with a groan. Clara didn't waste a second. She looped the rescue harness rope around his chest, securing it with the quick-release knots that her hands remembered even after all these years. "Hold on to me," she instructed, positioning herself to take his weight. Despite his larger frame, Clara's muscles, conditioned by years of rescue work, held firm as she guided him toward the passenger side. Another crack echoed through the ravine, longer this time, accompanied by the grinding sound of wood splintering. The truck shifted, metal groaning as its nose dipped further toward the rushing water. Small branches and debris rained down around them as the tree's grip weakened. "Ranger, pull!" Clara shouted, her voice carrying the authority that her faithful partner would recognize even now. Up on solid ground, the German shepherd's powerful shoulders bunched, as he leaned back into his harness, providing the crucial counterweight they needed. Clara began their ascent, half dragging, half supporting Evan as they struggled up the steep slope. Her boots sought purchase in the loose soil, each step carefully placed to avoid sending them sliding backward. Evan tried to help, his legs weak but moving, using whatever strength he had left to push upward. The wind whipped around them, carrying the sound of the tree's final surrender. Clara didn't look back. She couldn't afford to. Instead, she focused on the next step. Then the next, muscles burning as she fought against gravity and exhaustion. "Almost there," she panted, feeling Ranger's steady pull helping them advance. "Just a few more feet." The truck's metal frame screamed behind them, a sound that raised the hair on Clara's neck. She could feel the vibrations through the ground as the vehicle began to shift, the tree no longer able to hold it back. With one final surge of desperate energy, Clara heaved them both over the edge of the slope. They collapsed onto solid ground, gasping for breath as Ranger crowded close, whining softly and checking them both over. Clara's hands trembled as she pushed herself up, crawling the few feet to where the cardboard box sat safely with its precious cargo of kittens. The tiny creatures huddled together, wide-eyed but unharmed. The brave little kitten that had led them here had already joined its siblings, pressed close for warmth and comfort. A thunderous crash echoed through the ravine, followed by the sound of rushing water. Clara turned just in time to see the truck disappear into the churning river below, the current quickly sweeping it away. The tree that had held it for so long toppled after it, branches reaching skyward like desperate fingers before vanishing beneath the water's surface. Evan lay on his back, chest heaving as he gulped in the cold mountain air. His face was pale, streaked with dirt and sweat, but his eyes were clear as he turned to look at Clara. "You saved us," he managed between breaths. "All of us." Clara sat back, her own breathing gradually steadying as the adrenaline began to fade. Ranger settled beside her, his solid warmth a familiar comfort. She reached out to scratch behind his ears, remembering all the other rescues they'd performed together over the years. "That little kitten saved you?" she corrected, glancing at the box where the tiny hero rested with its family. "I just followed its lead." The wind continued to blow, but it felt less threatening now that they were all safely away from the edge. Clara could feel every muscle in her body protesting the recent exertion, but the satisfaction of a successful rescue, even an unexpected one, warmed her from the inside out. Evan pushed himself up to sitting position, wincing slightly. His gaze moved from the box of kittens to Clara and Ranger, then to the river where his truck had disappeared. The reality of how close he'd come to sharing its fate seemed to hit him, and he shuddered visibly. Clara's trained eye caught the telltale signs immediately. Evan's breathing had become shallow and rapid, his skin taking on an alarming pallor that had nothing to do with the fading daylight. Years of rescue experience told her they weren't out of danger yet. Shock and the cold mountain air were a deadly combination. "Stay with me, Evan," she said firmly, reaching for her weathered backpack. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, pulling out the thick emergency blanket she always carried. The silver-lined fabric crackled as she shook it open, wrapping it snugly around his trembling shoulders. "I'm just really tired," Evan mumbled, his words slightly slurred. His head started to droop forward. "No sleeping," Clara commanded, her voice carrying the same authority she'd used during countless rescues. "I need you to focus on my voice. Can you tell me where you live?" She knelt beside him on the rocky ground, one hand keeping the blanket secure while the other checked his pulse. Too fast, too weak. Ranger needed no instruction. The elderly German shepherd pressed his warm bulk against Evan's side, providing vital body heat. "Miller Creek Road," Evan responded after a pause that lasted too long. "Number 4, 412. "Good. Now, what kind of work do you do?" Clara kept her tone steady despite the worry gnawing at her gut. She tilted her head, straining to hear any hint of approaching sirens in the distance. Nothing yet. Mechanic. Own my own shop. His teeth chattered between words. Downtown. 10 years now. Clara noticed his breathing hitch sharply when he shifted position. Does it hurt to breathe? Yeah. Evan grimaced, one hand moving protectively toward his left side. Think something's broken. Try to take shallow breaths. Clara instructed, carefully adjusting the blanket to keep his core temperature from dropping further. Tell me about your shop. What's your specialty? Classic cars, mainly. His voice was barely above a whisper now, but he was fighting to stay focused. Restored a 1965 Mustang last month, cherry red. Beautiful machine. Ranger whined softly, his ears pricking forward. Clara felt the vibration of his low growl before she heard the distant wail of sirens. Relief flooded through her, but she knew the next few minutes were crucial. Help's coming, she assured Evan, noting how his skin had taken on a bluish tinge around his lips. But I need you to keep talking. The kittens. Were you taking them to a specific shelter? Happy Tales. Evan's eyes drifted toward the cardboard box where the small family huddled together. My wife. She used to volunteer there. Clara caught the past tense, saw the flash of pain cross his face that had nothing to do with physical injuries. Used to. Cancer. He closed his eyes briefly, then forced them open again. 3 years ago, she always brought strays home, couldn't leave them suffering. Sounds like you're carrying on her work, Clara said gently, checking his pulse again. Still too rapid, but steady. The sirens were getting louder now. Evan managed a weak smile. Sarah would have loved that little hero of yours. Always said, animals know more than we think. Clara glanced at the brave kitten that had led them here, now curled protectively around its siblings. She was right about that. The sound of tires on gravel cut through the air, followed by doors slamming and voices calling out. Ranger lifted his head but stayed pressed against Evan's side, unwilling to abandon his post until help arrived. Over here! Clara shouted, waving to direct the emergency responders. Watch your step. The ground's unstable near the edge. 2 paramedics appeared through the trees, carrying their equipment. Clara quickly briefed them on Evan's condition. Possible broken ribs, definite hypothermia, probable shock, while they began their assessment. Her voice remained professional, but her hand stayed firmly on Evan's shoulder, grounding him as the medical team worked. You're in good hands now, she told him as they prepared to move him onto a stretcher. I'll make sure the kittens are taken care of. Thank you, Evan whispered, his eyes meeting hers with surprising clarity despite his condition. For following that little cat. For not giving up. Clara squeezed his shoulder gently. That's what Sarah would have done, right? A tear slipped down Evan's cheek as he nodded slightly. The paramedics moved in then, efficiently transferring him onto the stretcher. Clara stepped back, Ranger pressing against her leg as they watched the rescue workers secure Evan for transport. She reached down to scratch behind Ranger's ears, feeling the slight tremor in her own hands now that the immediate crisis had passed. The aging shepherd leaned into her touch, his presence as steady and reassuring as it had been through all their years of service together. The sirens remained silent now, but red and blue lights still painted the darkening forest in alternate flashes. Clara listened to the measured voices of the paramedics as they worked, her ears still straining to catch any sign of Evan's condition worsening. The familiar tension of a rescue in progress hummed through her body. The job wasn't finished until everyone was safely out of danger. The piercing wail of sirens grew louder as 2 ambulances wound their way up the narrow dirt road. Clara watched the emergency vehicles approach, their red and blue lights casting eerie shadows through the trees. Her hands were still shaking from the rescue, the aftermath of adrenaline making her movements jerky and uncertain. The first paramedic team burst through the tree line, equipment in hand. They moved with practiced efficiency, their boots crunching on loose gravel as they approached. Clara stepped back, giving them space to work, but kept her voice steady as she briefed them on Evan's condition. Suspected broken ribs on the left side, she reported, falling easily into the familiar rhythm of emergency response. He's been showing signs of moderate to severe hypothermia, and he's been drifting in and out of focus for the past 20 minutes. The lead paramedic nodded, already checking Evan's vital signs. Her partner quickly set up monitoring equipment, attaching leads to Evan's chest with practiced movements. The kitten, which had been huddled against Evan's neck, bristled at the intrusion but didn't move from its spot. "Blood pressure's low," the first paramedic announced, unwrapping the cuff from Evan's arm. "Core temperature's definitely down. We need to get him transported now." They worked smoothly to transfer Evan onto the stretcher, but when one of them reached for the kitten, it flattened its ears and let out a warning hiss. Its tiny claws dug into Evan's blanket, refusing to budge. "Come on, little one," the paramedic coaxed, trying to gentle the kitten away. "We need to move him." The kitten only clung tighter, its green eyes wide and defensive. When another attempt was made to remove it, it gave a fierce growl that seemed impossibly large for its small body. Clara stepped forward, recognizing the depth of loyalty in the kitten's behavior. "Maybe we should let it stay with him," she suggested. "It's been through a trauma too. Separating them might cause more stress for both of them." The paramedics exchanged glances, then the lead one shrugged. "As long as it doesn't interfere with our equipment, it can ride along. We need to move now." They lifted the stretcher, kitten and all, and began the careful journey to the waiting ambulance. Clara and Ranger followed close behind, watching as they loaded Evan into the vehicle. The kitten maintained its position on his chest, pressed close to his heart as if guarding it. Through half-closed eyes, Evan managed to lift one hand, weakly stroking the kitten's fur. The small creature responded by tucking itself more securely against him, its purr audible even over the idle of the ambulance engine. "Remarkable little thing," one of the paramedics commented, shaking his head as he checked the IV line they'd started. "Never seen anything quite like it." Clara stood at the edge of the road, Ranger a steady presence beside her as the ambulance doors swung shut. The siren wailed to life again, and the vehicle began to move, its tires kicking up dust as it navigated the narrow track. She watched until the flashing lights disappeared around a bend in the road, leaving the forest in sudden, heavy silence. The weight of everything that had happened crashed over her at once. Her legs felt weak, and she found herself sinking down to sit on a fallen log. Ranger pressed against her side, offering the same comfort he'd given to Evan earlier. Clara buried her fingers in his thick fur, drawing strength from his solid presence. She was trembling now, the last of the adrenaline draining away to leave her feeling hollow and overwhelmed. The scene kept replaying in her mind. The truck teetering on the edge, Evan trapped inside, the desperate race against time. And through it all, that tiny kitten's unwavering determination to save not only its family, but the man who had tried to help them. The remaining emergency vehicles began to pull away, their red and blue lights fading into the gathering dusk. Clara sat there for a long moment, letting her breathing slow, feeling the familiar post-rescue exhaustion settle into her bones. But beneath the fatigue was something else, a spark she hadn't felt in years, a reminder of why she'd spent so long doing this work. Ranger's wet nose nudged her hand, and she realized she was still clutching the handle of her rescue pack. Her fingers were stiff from gripping it so tightly. She consciously relaxed them, watching as color slowly returned to her whitened knuckles. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying away the last echoes of the sirens. Clara remained seated, processing everything that had happened, struck by the extraordinary chain of events that had begun with a small, determined kitten refusing to give up on those it loved. The depth of that loyalty, from the woods to the ambulance, left her speechless, reminding her that sometimes the greatest courage comes in the smallest packages. 3 weeks after the rescue, Clara sat in her living room, absently running a brush through Ranger's coat. The morning sun streamed through the windows, catching dust motes in its golden light. Ranger's eyes were half closed in contentment, his tail thumping softly against the floor with each stroke of the brush. A knock at the door startled them both. Ranger's ears perked up, and he rose quickly despite his age, padding toward the entrance with purpose rather than alarm. Clara followed, curious about his unusual reaction. When she opened the door, she found Evan Callahan standing on her porch. Though still moving carefully, with white bandages visible at his collar, his face held a warm smile that reached his eyes. He looked stronger than the last time she'd seen him. Some healthy color returned to his cheeks. "Ms. Whitfield," he said, his voice carrying a slight tremor of emotion. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by. The sheriff helped me find your address." Before Clara could respond, Ranger pushed past her legs and approached Evan, tail wagging in welcome. The German shepherd pressed against Evan's legs as if they were old friends, drawing a soft laugh from the man. "Hey there, big fellow," Evan said, carefully bending to pat Ranger's head. "I remember you keeping me warm that day." A flash of movement caught Clara's eye. The kitten, which had been dozing in a patch of sunlight near the window, suddenly bounded across the room. It made a beeline for Evan, weaving between his legs with happy chirps before settling contentedly next to Ranger. The sight of the once frail creature, now healthy and confident, brought a smile to Clara's face. "Please come in," she said, stepping back from the doorway. "And call me Clara." Evan followed her into the living room, moving with the careful precision of someone still healing from serious injuries. He lowered himself onto the couch while the kitten, seeming to sense his discomfort, hopped up beside him and pressed against his leg. "I needed to thank you properly," Evan said, his voice thick with emotion. "The doctors said if you hadn't found me when you did..." He trailed off, swallowing hard before continuing. "Well, I wouldn't be here now." Clara sat in her armchair, watching as the kitten began to purr loudly, kneading Evan's leg with tiny paws. "That little one's the real hero," she said softly. "It knew exactly what it was doing when it found us on the trail." Evan nodded, gently stroking the kitten's now glossy fur. "About that," he said, clearing his throat. I think the kitten belongs here, with you and Ranger." Clara blinked in surprise. "But you saved them first," she protested. "You risked everything trying to get those kittens to safety." "And they're all doing great," Evan assured her. "The shelter found homes for the whole litter. But this one..." He gestured to the kitten, which had now migrated to Ranger's side and was curling up in the shepherd's thick fur. "This one's found its own family right here." Clara felt something shift in her chest as she watched the kitten snuggle deeper into Ranger's coat. The German shepherd curved his body protectively around the small creature, just as he had that first day on the trail. It was a sight that would have seemed impossible just weeks ago, when she'd been so determined to maintain her solitary routine. "I've been alone since my wife passed," Evan continued quietly. "I thought helping those kittens might be a way to honor her memory. She always had such a big heart for strays. But maybe this little one had an even bigger purpose. It brought me to someone who could save me, and in doing so, it found its true home." Clara felt tears prick at her eyes. Since losing her husband 2 years ago, she'd wrapped herself in the comfortable numbness of routine, taking her daily walks with Ranger and keeping the world at arm's length. But watching the kitten, so brave, so determined to save those it loved, had awakened something she thought she'd lost. "You're right," she said softly, her voice catching. "It does belong here." She looked at Ranger and the kitten, then back at Evan, seeing the quiet understanding in his eyes. This wasn't just about a rescued animal finding a home. It was about hearts opening, healing, finding purpose again. The kitten chose that moment to stretch languidly in Ranger's fur, letting out a contented sigh that seemed to fill the quiet room. Clara realized that the rescue hadn't just saved lives that day. It had given her something she hadn't known she was missing: a new family, pieced together by courage, compassion, and the unwavering determination of one small kitten. Thank you for watching. Stories like this remind us who we are. If something touched your heart, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story that just might stay with you.